We think we can play a positive role within the OAU.
You are watching South Africa's state-controlled television through the eyes of one of Africa's leading ambassadors.
This is still so preposterous.
From Global Vision, the television news magazine of Southern Africa.
The Protection of Information Act threatens journalists with jail.
It's got nothing to do with government policy. It's got nothing to do with apartheid or anything like that.
Because it is important that people know what is happening.
South Africa Now, this week featuring these stories. Election results. They gave an election in South Africa, and black people stayed away in droves, with white voters staying loyal to apartheid. We'll have analysis from Allan Boesak.
How do I assess the impact of the South African elections? That was merely a sideshow. It wasn't
and Jesse Jackson.
If the same type elections were held in Nicaragua, we would consider them invalid.
Do you know the difference between Bush and Dukakis on Southern Africa?
Southern Africa, I think that Bush doesn't say anything and Dukakis pretends he wants them dead.
In this country, we'll show you where the candidates stand on South Africa.
The two philosophies that are motivating the candidates are very, very different and would make for a lively and stimulating debate.
South Africa's media censors confiscated this film. You'll see a clip of what is being banned. And in our culture segment, the sounds of Lady Smith Black Mambazo. They made the Graceland album a worldwide smash. You'll hear why.
South Africa Now.
You are watching South Africa Now. Here's host Fana Kekana.
Dumelang. In our news summary, politics is our big story this week. The South African government's attempt to mobilize black voters in the October 26th municipal elections fell flat, while a significant number of white voters shifted to the more right-wing Conservative Party. The ruling National Party retained control in the major cities. But in the rural areas, including the strategic Transvaal province, the Conservatives swept most contested seats. The relatively liberal Progressive Federal Party made marginal gains. We have several views. Our first analysis of the results was taped here at New York's Riverside Church 4 days after the elections with the leader of the United Democratic Front, the Reverend Allan Boesak.
How do I assess the impact of the South African elections? That was merely a sideshow. It wasn't important in the sense that black people did not participate as the government had hoped. We did not want to participate. Those elections were not democratic. They were held under a state of emergency. In the event, it turned out that only 24.6% of black people voted in these elections. And you must remember, only 1.5 million even bothered to register. There are 26 million black people in South Africa who should have been voting the other day, and we did not. The gains that the Conservative Party have made, I think, may indicate that we have a period ahead of us where the South African government will obviously try to accommodate the right wing even more. I do not see any perceivable change unless you get changes from here to help the pressure we are putting on the government from the inside so that they could be forced to bring about the changes that are necessary.
The editor of SouthScan, the London-based computer information service from the region, offered this view. David Coetzee.
The prime aim of the government in setting up these elections was to re-establish its authority, the state's authority, in the black townships and in the black rural areas. And it's failed in this. It's clear that it hasn't had the necessary support. However, it's likely to go ahead with some kind of a project of establishing that authority. It'll be established through the security apparatus. White politics is a lesser issue in these elections. It succeeded perhaps in holding up against the Conservative Party onslaught in many areas. But it's also indicated that it can't really sustain this grip on the Afrikaner constituency far into the future.
The United Nations voted 146-0 with the US and Great Britain abstaining to condemn the elections. And at the UN, Jesse Jackson had this comment.
Well, until they open free and fair elections, they are basically invalid. we must support a democratic proposition. If the same type elections were held in Nicaragua, we would consider them invalid. And they're invalid in South Africa as well.
Our next report concerns the South African government's efforts to cultivate relations with African states. Here's how South African Broadcasting covered P.W. Botha's recent trip to Europe and the Ivory Coast.
Here, President Botha held talks with one of Africa's most respected elder statesmen, the Ivorian leader Félix Houphouët-Boigny.
South Africa now invited Oumarou Youssoufou, the UN ambassador of the Organization of African Unity, to watch the report.
This growing acceptance of South Africa was underlined during President Botha's European tour by a conditional offer by the Organization of African Unity to South Africa to join the OAU. Speaking at a Lisbon news conference, South African Foreign Minister Pik Botha welcomed the invitation.
I would like, on behalf of my organization, OAU, say categorically that there is no such an invitation to Botha to join the OAU. It doesn't make any sense, and it is simply ridiculous, because how can the same OAU, which is out campaigning against the apartheid system of South Africa, now invite this same racist minority government composed of people or influenced by people who served under Hitler in the Third Reich? How can we now turn around and say we invite these same people to come and join the OAU? The entire world will laugh at us. We will be a laughing stock.
Our next report involves new media censorship. A Johannesburg filmmaker, Kevin Harris, reports that the government censor seized the master copy of his new film documenting conditions in Namibia. We spoke to him by phone at his home.
It's the first time that a film has been seized, in the final stages of production, when it was just being completed. No reasons were given whatsoever. In fact, obviously they don't have to give any reasons. My own feeling is, well, I'm convinced that somebody who was present at the facility house where I was working didn't like what they saw and called the security police.
Harris plans to sue the government. South Africa now has obtained a copy of his film. Here's what may have upset the censors.
Within the fortress of Oshakati military headquarters, the South African security forces celebrate the 10th anniversary of their victory over SWAPO at Cassinga. Flown up from different regions of South Africa to take part in the celebrations are some 30 members of South Africa's elite paratroop battalion, part of the assault force of roughly 370 men who took part in the attack on Cassinga 10 years ago.
The worst thing was because we were just kept at that place, and you are not told when are you going to be released, and you were not even told why are you kept there. You really do not know what will happen to you. Maybe you are going to be killed, or they can have you there for eternity. This was very, very disturbing, and it was very painful.
With the release of the Mariental detainees, South African State President Mr. P.W. Botha invoked what is known as Section 103 Ter of the Defence Act for the first time in Namibia. This act, which enables the state president to terminate court proceedings if he feels it is not in the national interest, prevented the legal investigation into circumstances surrounding the detentions at Mariental.
South Africa Now is the world's only news magazine of Southern Africa. And according to the McNeil Lehrer News Hour, the program has also raised other issues.
There is widespread agreement among journalists and others that the restrictions have worked in reducing the amount of media coverage of South Africa. But the emergence of South Africa Now is refueling an ongoing debate over whether they have worked because the media, especially television, acquiesced without a fight. A recent study by the Canadian government came to the same conclusion. The report found that following the press restrictions, the 3 major U.S. networks carried far fewer items about South Africa in their evening newscasts. According to the report, Pretoria has been largely successful in removing scenes of poverty, violence, and human rights violations from the television newscasts of the Western world.
Southern Africa never surfaced as a major issue in the U.S. elections, but what American policymakers do or don't do will have a major bearing on the region. In our background report this week, South Africa Now takes a look at how apartheid was and was not part of this year's campaign. At last summer's Democratic Convention, South Africa was on the agenda.
We've already agreed as Democrats to declare South Africa to be a terrorist state.
First, Jackson raised the issue, and then Dukakis.
And we can and we will do a lot more to end apartheid in South Africa.
Archbishop Tutu later endorsed Dukakis.
And we would have very, very powerful friends in the White House.
But soon anti-apartheid organizers like Rob Jones were complaining that the issue faded.
When you look at the coverage of the U.S. elections, you don't see Southern Africa, you don't see apartheid, you don't see the U.S. policy with regard to South Africa as an issue. And it's one place where you could really have a head-to-head conflict because the two philosophies that are motivating the candidates are very, very different and would make for a lively and stimulating debate.
Does Jesse Jackson agree? We asked him.
Are you concerned that Southern Africa did not emerge as a larger issue in the campaign? You disappointed?
I can only say that during the course of my campaign, I kept it on the front burner. In Atlanta, the convention spoke, declared South Africa to be a terrorist state. Mr. Bush even referred to South Africa as a racist state. So it's higher on the agenda than it has ever been before. It must remain high on the agenda.
Where do the candidates stand? Recently on ABC's Nightline, Governor Dukakis stated his view.
But the question we have to ask ourselves, Ted, is whether or not the immorality of apartheid is so serious, and I think it is, and I think most Americans think it is, that we have to take very tough action against South Africa.
As you know, about 15 months ago, I moderated a debate among you and your then Democratic rivals. At that point, you said that you would be willing to send arms to the ANC.
I said I wouldn't rule out the possibility
of sending arms to the. That's right. Of sending
but I don't
arms
think
to the
that's
ANC.
necessary. I certainly don't think at this point it's called for in order, and I think there are other important things that we ought to do and should do, which I think can be effective in ending apartheid.
We asked the Republican campaign for a videotape of George Bush's position on apartheid, but they did not supply one. They did send us this statement outlining his views. Bush says he will enforce the sanctions law but not strengthen it. He supports the Reagan policy of constructive engagement, and on Angola he backs aid to Jonas Savimbi's UNITA and wants Cuban withdrawal, rarely criticizing South Africa.
My opponent had trouble, criticized us on our policy in Angola. It now looks, because of steady negotiation, that we may have an agreement that will remove the Cubans from Angola.
Bush's point went unanswered, but it prompted a comment from Michael Clough of the Council on Foreign Relations.
That the problem is that the Bush campaign, for obvious reasons, does not plan to make South Africa an issue, and that so far the Dukakis camp has been focused on other issues and has simply not decided how to approach the issue. I think part of the problem is that, and this is totally speculation, but I think the Dukakis camp may be a little bit afraid. I think that the Angolan negotiations have scared them off the issue. They're afraid that there's going to be a success in those negotiations and that therefore that might be used as an issue against them.
The author of this book, Dick Leonard, believes that there is more to George Bush's Southern African connection.
In the course of the current presidential campaign, it's really surprising that people haven't looked more closely at George Bush's record when he was CIA director. At that time, there were reports that he enjoyed close ties with the head of the South African intelligence agency, General Vandenberg. Also, one of George Bush's campaign managers, Lee Atwater, has worked with a lobbying firm in Washington, Black, Manafort and Stone, which represents UNITA in Angola, which is a South African surrogate movement. And also Stuart Spencer, who works with the Quayle campaign, was a lobbyist for the South African government in the early 1980s in Washington.
Our reporter called the Bush campaign about these disclosures.
We asked to record a response, but a spokesman declined. He said that only the CIA could comment on Bush's tenure there. But as we know, the CIA makes it a practice not to discuss operations. The spokesman did not know if Stuart Spencer had been a lobbyist and said that the campaign manager, Lee Atwater, only works on domestic politics for the PR firm that handles the Savimbi account.
Whatever the campaigns may say, it wasn't clear from our unscientific survey if the voters really know where the candidates stand.
The candidates have not been talking about their positions. They're talking a lot about each other, but very little they've said very little about what they really stand for.
They beat up each other, but they hardly say anything about South Africa that has any kind of meaning to us.
Good question. Do I know the difference between Bush and Dukakis of Southern Africa? Do you?
No, I don't. Do you know the difference between Bush and Dukakis on Southern Africa?
Southern Africa, I think that Bush doesn't say anything and Dukakis pretends he wants them dead.
No, I don't. I don't.
No. What would you replace apartheid with if apartheid went?
No, I don't know the difference between Bush and Dukakis.
Finally, we asked Reverend Allan Boesak, and he had a very clear answer.
What you should do to free South Africa, don't vote for Bush. That's one of the first things you could do.
South Africa Now will be seen every week at this time. Coming up next, our cultural segment featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expressions from Southern Africa.
I'm Mweli Mzizi. Vulindlela in Zulu, the word means he who opens the gate. And it's also the name a group of traditional South African singers gave to an American pop music star when he opened a gate to the world for them. Meet Lady Smith Black Mambazo, the Zulu choral group that brought the sounds of South Africa to a worldwide audience. In 1985, the group's leader, Joseph Shabalala, received a phone call from a fan, American pop music star Paul Simon.
I was very surprised of that Black Mambazo have a fan in America. And then after that, Paul Simon said to me, Joseph, I like to do something with the group. I said to him, as long as you want to sing, it's okay to me, everything is right.
Homeless, homeless, moonlight sleeping on a midnight.
One result of the musical collaboration between Black Mambazo and Paul Simon was the multi-million selling album Graceland, featuring such hit songs as Homeless.
Somebody sing, hello, hello, hello.
The success of the Graceland album led to a worldwide tour. This clip from a special broadcast on the Showtime channel shows Simon performing with Black Mambazo in Harare, Zimbabwe. Despite its artistic and commercial success, the Graceland project was criticized by some as a violation of the United Nations-sponsored cultural boycott against South Africa and its apartheid system. But others, like South African arts promoter Duma Ndlovu, defended the project.
When Black Mambazo was touring with Paul Simon, my position was very, very clear because I understand where they're coming from and I understand the kind of impact that their music has had inside the country. Mambazo has a very wide support inside the country, and there's no way that you can take a position against them, a political position against them, when they are, in fact, not on the wrong, and then hope to still have a constituency inside the country.
Since Graceland, the music of Lady Smith Black Mambazo has received international acclaim. Last year, their album Shaka Zulu won a coveted Grammy Award for Best Traditional Folk Album. Backstage at the Grammys, Joseph Shabalala explained the inspiration behind Mambazo's unique sound.
This sound from me, it just came from the mountain, from the birds, from the cow, the way they roar.
And backstage in New York recently, Shabalala amplified on the origins of Mambazo's music.
Our music came from that Zulu dance, especially this type of music, which we called Scatamiya. The name Scatamiya, we just named this music because we touch the floor softly instead of stabbing the floor hard.
Although it springs from a land of intense racial and political strife, the music of Lady Smith Black Mambazo is surprisingly devoid of overt political messages. Shabalala, a spiritual man and an ordained Pentecostal minister, explains.
Where I grew up, nobody talking about a politician, but my people love all my song. Let me mention this song. King of Kings, we kneel before thee. We are asking peace all over the world.
Mambazo's music has already helped break down racial barriers. The group recently performed to an integrated audience in their hometown of Ladysmith. It was the first time blacks and whites ever sat together at a concert there.
It was the first time to see people in township, black and white, and they were all happy. They started to shake hands, each other, love each other, and then they started to communicate and talk. It was a surprise. I asked to my people what's going on, and they asked me what's going on.
Shabalala says music is a universal language that cuts across all borders.
When I sing in Holland, I just sing Zulu. I thought maybe the people can't accept Black Mambazo because they are singing Zulu. But they feel the music, they clap hands, they are very happy of Nomatemba. Ooh. They love everything. Now that's why I say music is a universal language, because it touches the heart, heart to heart.
Lady Smith Black Mambazo has just released a new album called Journey of Dreams, and Joseph Shabalala says he has a dream for his country.
This music of South Africa is a music of peace. Love each other, forgive each other.
We'll have more reports from and about Southern Africa next week on South Africa Now. For a free list of resources on the issues and to share your comments, please send a self-addressed stamped envelope to South Africa Now, 361 West Broadway, New York, New York, 10013.